back to 48 for a moment. When did the UN declare Israel to be a country?
The decision of the UN came on the 29th of November 1947, when the UN General Assembly voted to create a Jewish and an Arab state in Palestine.
We will start it now.
Afghanistan? No. Argentina? Australia? Yes.
On November 29, 1947, Jews all over the world held their breath.
I sat near Rav Bunch. He had a list of the countries in front of him. He recorded the way each country voted.
The resolution of the Dutch Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And when the partition resolution came into being on May 14th, 1948, 7 Arab armies invaded the new Jewish state, the nascent Jewish state, in an effort to prevent its emergence, and that effort was also rebuffed.
In the whole history of the world, no people, no country has ever gone out of existence for anything like 2,000 years and then been reborn.
You're really used to Israel being a nation, so it's like, well, I mean, they've always been a nation as far as I can remember.
Thanks, David. Yes, we are live here in Jerusalem, marking the anniversary of the war which changed the course of the Middle East. 40 years later, the region is as divided as ever, though.
But the reestablishing of Israel as a nation is such a dramatic, radical, stunning, convincing sign.
On the 5th of June 1967, Israel launched an all-out war on its Arab neighbors. In just 6 days, Israel defeated 3 Arab armies and tripled its land area.
It was impossible to happen, historically speaking. It's never happened before, anything like it in human history, that a nation would be out of its homeland for even more than 40 years, one generation, and still return back to that land with its language. And it was about 2,000 years.
The newly formed state could not be destroyed. For Arab countries, the shock and scale of the sudden defeat came as a huge blow.
Israel found itself outnumbered and outgunned on 3 fronts: Egypt to the south, Jordan to the east, and Syria to the north. The Soviet Union had poured $2 billion worth of arms into the Arab nations. Israel's enemies brought twice as many soldiers, 3 times as many tanks, and 4 times as many airplanes to the battlefield. But just before the war, Egypt, Israel's main enemy, suffered a series of major mistakes and mishaps.
The Six-Day War is considered one of the most decisive military operations in history.
On the morning of June 5th, Jordanian radar detected the Israeli Air Force taking off. They sent a red alert to Cairo, but the decoding officer used the wrong day's code and failed to decipher the vital information. The warning never came.
In the Middle East that began on June 6, 1967, I don't think you can find another event, certainly not in the modern history of this region, which has been so limited in its time frame and so circumscribed geographically, which has had such profound regional and indeed international ramifications.
To some, the confusion in the Egyptian command just before the war evoked memories of the biblical story of Gideon routing the enemies of Israel. Instead of annihilation, Israel won one of the most decisive victories in military history.
Creates a miracle like that war, 6 days, and you're not only you have saved yourself, but you're now Lord of the world, King of the world. That feeling in many people translated into some messianic feeling. In other words, that is not a victory man-made. That's God-made.
When Israel became a nation, the calendar from heaven began an entirely new season for human history. We're in a different time frame than any time of history. That was the signal of a whole new season.
Well, police say 3 murder victims in Fresno, California today were also chosen at random.
Muhammad surrendered to police, yelling "God is good" in Arabic.
He yelled out "Ali Akbar" as he was seated in the back seat of the patrol car,
shaking the city of Fresno to its core.
Too much things are going on in this city, not only this, around the whole world, all this violence.
As the area is secured, Parisians, many now accustomed to these emergencies, ordered to keep their...
Police and troops are on alert all over France after another act of terror in Paris. A gunman who was allegedly known as a threat to police.
A Parisian landmark turned into a crime scene. The Champs-Élysées is one of the busiest parts of town.
What can you say? It just never ends.
Just 2 days ago, 2 men were arrested in Marseille, France, suspected of planning an attack to disrupt the election.
The showdown with North Korea. The rogue state is turning up the temperature yet again.
The young leader of an impoverished nation has an appetite for grandiose propaganda.
South Korea has come so far, is so dramatically stronger, better, more prosperous, freer. You'd hate to see anything happen that would disrupt that development. So I think this is a very serious time.
Venezuela is at a breaking point. Thousands taking to the streets yet again today after weeks of violent protests in the capital city of Caracas.
As a cloud of uncertainty hangs over the future of the South American country.
There were other 5 victims. So again, it seems like not only is the sort of tension escalating.
The world, it seems, is quickly moving toward a point of no return.
Some of the worst fighting to grip Libya has played out in recent months as seesaw battles rage between rival militia and the military.
Now, some of these trends have existed throughout church history, but in the end times, they have a distinct intensity. That's the point. They make global headlines in a way they never did before. They constitute a sign, meaning some theologians look at these and they go, well, they've always been there. There's no sign in just the general trends of history. This is talking about a heightened level that's distinct.
Madam President, today a perfect storm has engulfed the Middle East and continues to threaten international peace and security. Millions have been displaced in the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. In many countries, societies have fractured along ethnic or religious lines.
Men and women, it seems like every day there is something in the news that reminds us of the perilous times in which we live.
The American flag is under attack on a college campus yet again, this time at UC Davis, where its student senate voted to remove the flag from its meetings.
Cabot Phillips, what the heck is going on?
We've got patriotism triggering people now. And look, this may be shocking to many of our viewers at home, but for anyone that has stepped foot on a college campus in the past few years, they know this is the environment we have now where students are coddled and almost encouraged to be offended by everything, in this case, the American flag.
Verse 10, he goes, it's going to go beyond that. Hatred towards one another, believer, unrelated to faith. Hatred in the culture is going to be common at a level beyond what it is now. We can see it increasing. Never in my 40 years of ministry have I seen the social context in which people are so easily offended. And so sensitive and preoccupied with their honor and how they're treated and all these things. Just powder kegs are just everywhere. Just a phrase will set off a riot in a university or a city or a college or a nation, because there's this incredible shift of the emotional climate in society. It's going to get far more intense.
But critics fear this is becoming an anti-American trend among universities.
And look, this isn't isolated. If this was one isolated incident, you could chalk it up to a few crazy college students. But we reported across the country at Leadership Institute's Campus Reform on all this craziness.
In what world do people think it's okay for teachers to discuss transgenderism with a bunch of 5-year-olds? Maybe, just maybe, they ought to stick to teaching the kids how to read and write instead of deconstructing their God-given gender identity. And whatever happened to reading an old-fashioned nursery rhyme? You know, back when I was in school, Jack and Jill went up the hill, but today, when Jack came down, he was wearing Jill's dress and going by the name Jackie.
They are calling it the worst thing any contestant has ever done in 34 seasons of their reality show Survivor. Fans around the world are outraged over the tactics of contestant Jeff Varner during a tribal council when he outed fellow contestant Zeke Smith as transgender.
Deception is dressed up in a happy countenance and positive messaging. The presentation of deception is very, very positive most times. I mean, there's a few exceptions. Deception is the most dangerous of all of the negative trends because we're unaware of it. It's right next to us, and it's positive, and it's happy, and it's affirming, and yes, it feels good. Boom, we gotcha. That's what the enemy would say. Jesus said this is number one.
Thanks for having me.
This is one of the most profound changes, I think, in the history of the West, the redefinition of sex from a biological reality to a social construct, and it's had a lot of implications.
But starting at the end of the month, some women's, men's, and even gender-neutral restrooms at UW-Madison will have free tampons. And the students I talked to tonight didn't even flinch when I asked them about putting these in men's restrooms.
Is the idea that sex is purely a social construct and not a biological reality, is that rooted in science?
No, this is what was really stunning to me, was to see how, we have science thrown in our faces all day long. And, your sex is literally established from the moment of conception. That is a very basic biological medical reality. And if you read, say, medical textbooks, they're going to talk about your sex in very plain scientific terms. And society is going in a completely different direction.
There's a passage that's been on my heart the last couple of months. It's 2 Timothy 3, in talking about this world that we live in right now. But it's an interesting passage because he starts off, Paul tells Timothy, understand this.
But it'll start, know this. Paul said, this is need to know information. This isn't just kind of like casual information.
And then he says this in verse 2, for people will be lovers of self.
It's not for nothing that Webster's officially added the word selfie to the dictionary this year.
Why? Perhaps because narcissism has become completely intertwined with the fabric of our society.
Oxford estimates use of the word in the past year has increased 17,000%.
The crazy thing about this list is many of these things we read, and nowadays we just kind of shrug our shoulders at it.
The current version of the DSM defines narcissism as intense self-absorption and a grandiose sense of self. Sounds familiar.
Because the emotional dynamics of billions of people is going to shift to an increase of evil and selfishness. So he's talking about the emotional dynamics of the planet.
I grew up in something often called Generation Me, but when I look at the current world, I can't remember why that fit us. This is Generation Me, or maybe Generation Look at Me.
And it's become so normal to us. I mean, I was reading this thing about the sociologists are saying that our culture, this generation, is by far, by a long shot, the most narcissistic culture to ever exist.
It seems that has become part of the zeitgeist. The idea that everyone deserves a camera crew or a microphone to broadcast everything about them.
Everyone thinking, I have the opinion that's going to change. We think that's normal.
We have Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, Foursquare, and myriad blogging tools that are built to allow us to tell the world everything we're thinking, as if every thought we have should be shared.
You understand, back then they'd be like, you gotta be kidding me. Everyone is gonna think that their voice should be heard, and everyone is gonna build this shrine to themselves so that everyone else can see and make themselves look as good as possible. It's normal.
That's what Paul is describing here.
What do you want to believe? What's your pleasure? What would you like? I'll find you a teacher to give you that. But Paul tells Timothy, don't you be one of those guys. You know what this book says. You preach it. You lay it out there. Now's the time to stay the course. Now this time is to stay strong, because the time's coming. People are going to be lovers of themselves, lovers of pleasure, not lovers of God.
How about this? How about this? I go over there, punch him in the head, and come right back.
Carrie, no! Like Tom Cruise and other celebrity Scientologists, Remini vocally supported the church to a religion that demanded much of your time, your money, and your mind.
It is our responsibility to be Scientologists, no matter where we live or work, no matter our resources or excuses.
Well, what you would be told is that you're working to be your better self in all areas of your life.
Yes, we live in turbulent times, but actually we also live in amazing times. And this may sound a little odd when you switch on the evening news at the moment. You do sometimes have to wonder whether you're watching a Hollywood B movie or actually watching reality unfold.
What appears to be an attack on French.
So, clearly, the global in-tray is very disruptive. It is creating uncertainty. It is also signaling a degree of complexity that in some ways is unprecedented. And if you just take the most brutal news item of the last week, that we have the United Nations declaring 4 concurrent droughts. First of all, there hasn't been one declared in over 20 years, and now we have 4 concurrent droughts.
You know, the world's getting crazy. Who knows what's going to happen next? You just see it happening. The writing's on the wall. Every month seems like just something new.
In the midst of a world that was actually beginning to lose a sense of collective interest, why is it that nations agreed for the first time on a shared agenda for development? This has never existed before.
The resolutions on sustaining peace and the 2030 agenda are calls for hope.
Put them with all the political signs that we haven't looked at, all the other globalization signs, you put them all together and say, what hour of history are we living in? Jesus says it over and over, watch. Look here in Mark 13. It says it 3 times in one passage. Daniel 11:33, the people of understanding, or the wise, use whichever term you want, they're called by this angel the people who understand what's going on. Meaning right now today, many in the nations, as things are heating up, they're pretty confused what's going on.
Where he goes, Timothy, there's going to be a time when no one puts up with this but you. As for you, let them go. They're going to go and they're going to just find a teacher to tell them what they want to hear. Why? Because they're a lover of pleasure. They don't believe there's a judgment. Man, half the people in the church don't even believe a judgment's coming. Which I just go, man, did you ever read this? Like you go, well, I don't believe a loving God could judge. I go, get to page 2. You're just quoting Old Testament. Yeah, because he mellows out in Revelation. What they're unwilling to do is preach truth. See, it used to be that there was a lot of preaching of the gospel, and yet it seemed like, why don't you care for the poor? Why don't you care for the needs of the earth? And it wasn't a popular thing, but now it's very popular to go care for the needs of the world. You're never going to get attacked for drilling wells overseas, but you'll get attacked for preaching the morality in this book. You'll get attacked by saying there's only one way to heaven, it's through Jesus Christ. And you'll get attacked for saying that there's a narrow road and few will find it, and yet there's a wide, easy road that leads to destruction. And so a lot of times we'll run to the things that are popular. But where are we?